Thinking Out Loud with Dave Palmer. Here on Morning Joy, where truth matters.
I am definitely thinking out loud this morning, and host and guest, and very good to be with you. It's Tuesday, July 30th. This is Morning Joy, where truth matters. And if you're thinking, where is Keith Downey? I want Keith back. Well, Keith will be back on Monday, and it's good to be with you. I'm Dave Palmer, and I generally work as executive director of the North Texas stations of the GRN, and very honored to be with you this morning, working with Tim and Debbie and Adam and all the team. And so, but yeah, Keith is on a vacation. He'll be back on Monday, and we hope he's having a very restful time. All right, so you just heard the promo for Back to the Father. That's a program that Cecil Anderson and I do on Fridays at 1 o'clock. It's only on the social media platforms, but we talk about topics related to the Summa Theologiae. We have a little cadre of folks that join us, and they like to talk about philosophy and things like that. And so during this segment, typically Keith is asking me questions, or we're talking about a topic related to the Summa, but Keith's not here, and I'm here, and so I dragged Tim into the conversation and said, Tim, let's talk about some philosophy. And it's something that I think comes pretty naturally to Tim. He's a bright guy, and we want you to be in on the conversation as well. If you'd like to ask a question about the Summa, St. Thomas Aquinas, philosophy in general, give us a call. We'd love to hear from you this morning in this segment. 877-757-9424, 877-757-9424. Tim Mott, senior producer and philosopher extraordinaire. How are you doing?
Philosopher extraordinaire. No, I actually am friends with a lot of philosophers, and I am not extraordinaire. They are. It's a pretty fun thing, though. I like to try and, catch up whenever I can. If you are the host and the guest, then that makes me the producer and the call screener at the same time. So if a call comes in, which I would love to hear from our listeners with their questions about Aquinas or philosophy, this is a great time for it. But I'm going to jump off the microphone and jump on the phone and then come back to you with the callers. That would be pretty cool. Let's give that number out one more time: 877-757-9424, and it's a perfect time to ask your questions about Aquinas for the next 12 minutes or so.
I'm curious if the folks out there listening have any experience in maybe picking up the Summa. Most people have heard of at least the article about the 5 proofs for the existence of God, and I think people are maybe familiar with that. But that's, it's interesting. That's only one article of about 3,000 in the Summa. That's all packed into one article. He took a lot of that from Aristotle. But, if people want to call in, that'd be great. But Tim, I'll share something that I think relates to the next right thing from the last couple of days, and this is that whole controversy about the opening ceremonies. And Debbie, on a number of occasions, referred to the homily that Father Chris Alar gave on Saturday after the whole debacle and nonsense with that opening ceremonies. And he started, the first words out of his mouth in his homily were, St. Thomas Aquinas said, and he quotes St. Thomas, and I'm paraphrasing, but all sins are small compared to the sin of blasphemy. And that's one thing that I think we can take out of this from St. Thomas Aquinas, is that he said that sin is great according to the object of who you are sinning against. And so I think in our culture we emphasize a lot sins against human beings, and rightly so. Murder and racism and things like this. These are horrible things that people can do, and abuse. But Thomas would say definitely those are horrible sins, and certainly mortal sins objectively. But when the object is God, like hatred of God or unbelief or despair or something like blasphemy or sacrilege, that'd be an even greater sin. And you rarely hear that said. And also you'll also see in the Summa that Thomas will also become quite indignant. Even though he has great respect for his intellectual opponents, he'll often say, we wouldn't be so absurd as to believe that, or this is preposterous. And you can see a little bit of his ire getting up, especially when he feels like God is the target of anything, negative or sinful. So yeah. I think he would definitely be very offended by those opening ceremonies. But anyways, that's one little principle. But there's a few other things I can mention. But do you have any other general questions? I want to throw out the phone number again as well if anybody wants to call in and talk a little Summa Theologiae, St. Thomas Aquinas, 877-757-9424. 424 is the phone number to call.
Yeah, I've got a couple questions that I've always wanted to ask about the Summa, but they're kind of at the surface level. I love it when you get into the deep topics. Like we had one on the plan for God's knowledge and how God knows things and what that means for us. And I was like, oh, getting into the weeds is great. But I wanted to go back to the surface level a little bit and ask, first of all, is it Summa Theologica or Summa Theologiae? What is that? Well, I've seen it both ways. Like, what is the actual title of this book?
I think it's tomato. Really, it's, I say Summa Theologia, but I have definitely heard people say, Summa Theologia, or different pronunciations, and I know that that's so fundamental and so basic, but I think it's really a preference. Of course, Summa Theologia, the words would be Latin, and he wrote it in Latin, and his first language would have been Italian, and it's been translated into pretty much every language, and it's pronounced different ways. But yeah, I don't know. I say Summa Theologia, and I don't typically get called out for that. So that's going to be my answer.
Okay, good. Well, I have a theory, and maybe you can check me on this and look it up later. But I think one of them is probably Latin for the summary of theologies,
yes,
and the other one is a theological summary. I don't know. I don't know Latin well enough, but maybe you can check that. Okay, my second question is: the Summa better used as like a sit-down book where you work through it, or as a reference book where you look things up?
Yeah, now that would be an opinion question as well, and my personal opinion is that you should read it in order. Now, if somebody says, I'm doing a research on the virtue of justice, and I want to go to that part of the Summa and see what St. Thomas Aquinas says about justice, have at it, because it's not like, I think I'm going to read the entire thing in order to learn about justice. But on the other hand, I think it's hard to understand the totality of a virtue if you don't understand all the rest of it. I made the decision years ago to just plow through the Summa a couple of times and read it in its entirety. I don't think that's in everybody's life plan or bucket list, but I think it's like Scripture. Are you going to understand a verse in Scripture if you don't understand the totality of it? And how often have individual verses been taken out of context? And, you and I were talking yesterday about the question in the Summa about predestination, where St. Thomas Aquinas says, is man predestined? And his answer is yes. Some are predestined, and there is predestination in God. But if you don't understand God's nature and his knowledge and his will and a lot more about God, and how the difference between God's nature and human nature, then it's going to be very hard to understand predestination in context. And otherwise, you're going to just become a fatalist, like, well, then life doesn't matter because we're predestined, or, that kind of thing.
Right.
So I would say if you have the time and the interest, go ahead and just plow through the thing and just learn it. You'll enjoy it very much. Or find a trusted teacher or source, and then, you can learn it that way as well.
Or if you don't have time, just listen to Back to the Father every Friday, and you'll eventually get through the whole thing, right?
Eventually, yeah. It may take a while, but eventually you will. Yes.
But that'll be fun. Just a little bit of Thomas in your life every week. We didn't get a call, but we did get a question in our YouTube comments here. Sean on our YouTube, GRN Online, has put in a question. He's always been curious what inspired St. Thomas to write the Summa. Like, why would St. Thomas undertake to do a summary of all theology?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, Sean. And I think, I don't know if he does actually kind of explain this at the very, very beginning of the Summa. There's a little introduction paragraph, and he said some have undertaken to do this, but interestingly, because some people think that the Summa is very long and laborious, but he says basically the ones that have been done previously were just too long and hard to get through, and he was trying to simplify it as much as possible.
He's trying to simplify it.
Yeah, and he also says the Summa is for beginners, okay? He mentions that it's for beginners, so this is a textbook for beginners. But, it was the 13th century was a very interesting time because Christendom reigned across much of the Christian world in Europe. But you also had an influx of pagan philosophy where Aristotle was being introduced to the Muslims had already been using Aristotle for several hundred years, but it was being introduced into the English world. And that was very controversial because now you had the Greek philosophy being intertwined with the tradition that came down from the Jewish and Christian, heritage. And there was a lot of confusion. The church didn't quite know what to do with this. Are we supposed to rely on pagan philosophers like who didn't know of Christ and grace? Or do we discard it altogether? And Thomas Aquinas and Albert and these kind of people were definitely of the opinion, no, there's something that we can get from this. And so I think what his genius was being able to take from all the different sources and bring it together. He quotes Muslim philosophers like Avicenna and Averroes. He quotes Jewish philosophers, certainly pagan philosophers as well. But always the gold standard was the truths of the Christian faith. And if something were to contradict Scripture, if something were to go against the revealed truth of the Christian faith, then it was discarded. But as long as it didn't contradict, he saw some beauty and some goodness in all of the input that came even from non-Christians. And I think that was his motivation, is that it was the time in his Christian history when we could incorporate other sources and learn from them and conform them to the truths of the Christian faith and come up with a summary of theology based on that. So, Sean, a long answer to a short question, but thank you for that question.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer, and thank you for the question in the YouTube chat there. So I don't think we're going to have time to get any calls on the air at this point, but I just want to remind people that you can always comment in our YouTube chat, which is very active at GRN Online on YouTube, or if you search Morning Joy Radio, that'll get you there as well. We're also broadcasting on Facebook and Instagram, and I think we're on Twitter and maybe even TikTok today. They added a new one on there for me, so I haven't checked all of the destinations, but I will go while you are on your next segment, Dave, and we'll do that. Hey, this is great having you on, but I'm going to turn it back over to you for this last transition into the end of our first hour. Say goodbye to Aquinas Communications, and the rest of us will continue.
All right, there's the music. Thanks so much, Tim. I appreciate you helping out with that segment. That was fun. I appreciate it, and thanks for the questions that came through as well. You are now wrapping up along with us the first hour of Morning Joy on this Tuesday, July 30th, and we have another hour coming up, including the Clubhouse, so stick with us if you can. If you're leaving, hey, we'll hope to see you tomorrow morning. God bless you. This is Morning Joy, where truth matters, on the GRN.
This has been Morning Joy, where truth matters, hosted by Keith Downey. Take some joy with you today. Visit grnonline.com/joy to listen again, share a segment, or answer the question of the day. That's grnonline.com/joy.